Can everybody hear me all right? Awesome. Oh, by the clicker. Hello, it's a pleasure to be up here today. My name is Jake Ferus. I'm a geoscience master's student at Georgia State University, and this is a culmination of two NASA developed projects that happened over the summer and spring of this year. And today we're going to be talking about wetlands, why they are important, and why we should continue to fight to protect them. And you might ask, why do we even need to protect them in the first place? And that is because in 2023, the Sackett versus EPA court case changed the definition of what a protected water of the United States is. This had effects across all waters of the United States, but specifically for wetlands, it means that they are no longer protected if they don't have a direct surface connection to a navigable water of commerce. And that means they have to physically just be touching another major riverway to be considered protected. Even if they are connected via groundwater, they are still considered not protected by the federal government. And that means that it's up to the states to protect them, that have the protections for these wetlands. And that's why we partnered with the Coastal Conservation League. It is an organization fighting for the protection of natural resources in South Carolina, and they're trying to fight protections for wetlands. And to fight for the protection of wetlands, you have to know which ones are protected and which ones are isolated. And for that, we made these maps. These are the connected and isolated wetlands of the three study sites in South Carolina: Jasper, Berkeley, and Horry. They're along the coast of South Carolina. In green, we can see are the connected wetlands. Those are the ones that are protected. And then in yellow are the ones that are isolated, not protected in these three counties. And if you were like me the first time when I made this map, there are a lot of wetlands in these counties. It was genuinely shocking to me, but on the coast, it's lower land, more wetlands form, more floodplains. But looking at just the wetlands that are connected, the protected ones, they follow the trends we would predict them to follow based on the court case definition. They follow the major riverways. The Cooper River in Berkeley goes from Charleston all the way up to Lake Moultrie, River Wakama in Horry. Though they're following what we would expect them to follow. But then going into the isolated wetlands, there are a significant amount of wetlands that are no longer considered protected. These wetlands they're isolated. They are nearly 50% of the wetlands in these counties are no longer considered protected. That is a significant amount. And why does that matter? The wetlands are still there, but they are now being threatened by land use, land cover changes. They're being threatened by urbanization, by farming, which those are the two main ones for these three counties. And with those additions adding to those landscapes, they're being degraded. They could potentially be lost, and they're vital ecosystem natural habitats. They provide carbon sequestering. They are very unique biodiversity hotspots, and they are unique biogeochemistry cyclers. But for the topics of this presentation, they are also large mitigators of floodwaters. Especially in a coastal county, mitigating floods is vital. Floodings cost millions of dollars of damages. They upset lives, and that is the avenue we went through to try to fight for the protections of these wetlands. So to understand how a wetland can protect against floods, you have to first have a storm. And for this, we looked at Hurricane Florence. This was a Category 4 hurricane that hit South Carolina in 2018. Ooh. It'll move in a second. I believe in it. Yes, this is a Category 4 hurricane that hit South Carolina. As we can use the imagination. It will go and hit the top of South Carolina, hitting Horry first, then Berkeley, and then Jasper County. And then using that, we were able to create these three flood extent maps. The first one on the left is synthetic aperture radar. It is able to penetrate cloud cover, and with that, we were able to see the hurricane flooding during the events of the storm. We looked at 2 weeks after, because the 2 weeks after the storm is when those are the waters that remain, or the ones that do the significant most amount of damage. And here with the flood extent 2 weeks after, we can see it 2 weeks before and get a good estimate of how radar looks at flood extent. And then looking at the middle, it's more of an optical version of looking at flood extent. It's used by Landsat. Flats the flood in Landsat across tidal systems is an equation to use to be able to understand where flood extent goes across, away from rivers. Is just a good way to calculate it. But using that, we can get a good optical version and variant of the storm event. And then using hand, we're able to look at a predicted model of how flooding will look like based purely on elevation. It looks at the height above the nearest drainage, and these are just a few examples of it expanding based on how much flooding is there. And using these and a few other variables like impervious cover and slope, we were able to create a predicted flood vulnerability map. Here in the bottom right, this is the Waccamaw River going across Horry County. Areas in red are the areas of the highest flood vulnerability. Then going to orange is the medium flood vulnerability. And then going into gray is the low flood vulnerability. And this is behaving exactly as we would expect it to behave. The areas along the river have the highest likelihood of flood, and then as you go to the floodplain, it's going to medium likelihood of flooding. You need just a little bit more water to get it to flood, and then going to the gray areas, the higher elevations, less likely to flood. But with this, now we're able to see which wetlands are in areas of high flood vulnerability. So those are the wetlands that are the best and most likely to mitigate large amounts of floodwaters. They're the ones that are in the highly vulnerable areas. And so using that, this is the same animation as last time, but with the isolated wetlands, the non-protected ones. And here we can see that there are still a significant amount of wetlands that are in areas of high flood risk. Even we would expect that it's so close to a river that it would still be protected, but these still are technically not protected by the federal government. And these are the wetlands that, if turned over or if converted to different land use covers, won't providing the same high probability flood mitigation services that they could be. Same thing with the medium flood risk going outward. So now we can see which wetlands have the highest probability to protect against flooding, but now which communities need the flood protection the most. And for that, we made a bivariate map looking at social vulnerability to flood risk. Here, we were able to highlight which communities need these flood mitigation services the most. Social vulnerability was made from heirs property. It was made from likelihood of having a car. It was made from having health insurance and other economic factors. Those communities are the ones that, if a storm like this were to happen, they would be the ones most devastated and harder to bounce back, resilience and resistance type of aspects. And this is I would say we were able to pinpoint a few areas right above the Savannah Wildlife Refuge in Jasper. In Berkeley, this is above Lake Moultrie. And surprisingly, in Horry County, around here, this darker purple spot, that is right behind Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. And I know if you know South Carolina, Myrtle Beach is a very popular tourist attraction in the state of South Carolina. So the fact that a highly populated area, a high income of people is in an area of high flood risk is something to definitely consider when managing. But these are a few more aspects of looking at it. The left is the national scale that FEMA does to assess flood risk. And it's an amazing data set. It goes across all of CONUS, but it is a little coarse. As you can see, Jasper is completely one color. It doesn't have that high definition that you would need when figuring out which specific communities need high mitigating wetlands. And so comparing that to what we did with the census tract, you can have a little bit more detail. And removing some variables like likelihood of health insurance, which you can't get at the block group level, we were able to create the block group social vulnerability and see specific communities that we need to highlight going forward. And this is Levi, a community of interest to our partners at Coastal Conservation League. And with that, now that we know which wetlands are high mitigators of floods, and now we know which communities are in areas that could have these wetlands to protect them against flooding. So I would like to leave you guys all today with three main topics and three main points to take home. The first one is after the Sackett versus EPA court case, half of the wetlands in South Carolina and these three study sites do not have federal protection. That is a large number of wetlands that could be providing vital flood mitigation to those communities. 43% of those non-protected wetlands are in areas of medium to high flood risk. It's it's a it's a it's a significant amount comparatively to what it once was. But a little hope going forward. The Coastal Conservation League, the partners we had, are fighting and lobbying for statewide protection of these wetlands in South Carolina. And I hope, following similar models, that other states can also fight for these protections as well. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure being up here today. I would like to thank the Develop Summer team and the Develop Spring team for this project. It wouldn't have been anywhere near as good without them. And I would love to thank Dr. Mathis and Laramie Plott as being leaders for the Develop term. And Dr. Marguerite Madden, I would love to thank her very much as our science advisor. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't know what a wetland is without her. And thank you to the Coastal Conservation League for this project. It was a pleasure. Yeah, any questions? Nope. Thank you.
All right, thanks again to our four winners for today. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Yes, great job. Okay, so as a reminder, tomorrow we will do this all over again with our other final four grand prize winners. So I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Thank you.